Well, hi there. So in this video, we're going to take a look at natural monopolies, and then we're going to identify the socially optimal or the perfectly competitive level of output and price that monopolies should be at. Because they're not, we would say they're not allocative efficient, which means that there's deadweight loss. So that's the last thing that we'll take a look at. So let's get started. Okay, so the first thing we want to observe about what natural monopolies are is that they're a monopolist where the demand curve is going to intercept the downward sloping part of an ATC. That's a little bit of a complicated concept to think through. What it really represents is that maybe the firm has really big upfront fixed costs, and every time they add a new customer or they sell an additional unit, they actually find that their average costs are now lower. This is going to result in a slightly different looking graph. So normally when we've been graphing cost curves, you have this marginal cost curve that comes down and goes back up. And then you have ATC that hits its minimum at marginal cost. What we would kind of say is that a natural monopoly exists only in this range, right? So imagine if your demand curve was downward sloping here, and basically this was the only graph that you really drew. And so it's kind of like if this bottom part of MC and ATC, if they were stretched out really, really far, that's really what a natural monopoly looks like. Another way to think about a natural monopoly is that it actually only exists in the long run, where companies basically are in the economies of scale range of an LRATC. There's a little bit more kind of complicated technical things with natural monopolies that we are eliding in this lecture, but really we can just get started with the graph. So the graph is going to be similar. Whoa, that wasn't quite a horizontal quantity. The graph's going to be similar to the artificial in that you have a demand curve that tells you the price, and you have a separated marginal revenue curve. But instead of the marginal cost coming down and going back up like that, it's actually going to be kind of downward sloping. And so we actually have a marginal cost that does one of these. And so marginal cost comes down like that. Now, we know that demand tells us the price, and marginal cost is kind of like the supply curve, if you will. And so we would say that a competitive place that they would produce would be where demand and supply is. But they're not going to produce that. They're going to produce where MR equals MC. So we're going to say Q sub F here. Now, the amount that the firm produces, Q sub F, corresponds to a price on the demand curve that's up here. So just like an artificial monopoly, we would say that a natural monopoly overcharges and doesn't produce enough compared to what would be optimal. And so again, finding that optimal point, just to kind of get it's a little bit ahead of where we're going to be here, but that optimal point is going to be where supply and demand intercept. Now, this does say that the natural monopoly is in profit. So when I put my ACC curve on, the price is going to be above the ATC. And if you notice up here, the way I've drawn this, the marginal cost is this line and the ATC is this line. And so when I go to draw my ATC, I need it to be above that marginal cost line, just like it's drawn here, but where the ATC intercepts this quantity needs to be below what that price is. So this value right here is less than the price, and so we can actually shade our profit rectangle thus. So it goes from the intercept of that ATC curve at quantity F up to the price and over. So it is the same way that we kind of did profit in the other monopoly. So coincidentally, they could earn zero economic profit. That would be a weird coincidence, but it is possible. So I'm going to draw you a graph quickly here to show you what that would be. Again, we have a downward sloping MR that's less than the demand or less than the price. And for this one, again, we're going to put our marginal cost coming down like that. Oh, that's a really low one. So again, that would be our optimal point where supply and demand intercept. But the firm's not going to produce there. They're going to produce Q sub F. And again, we price up on the demand curve because the demand curve tells us what people are willing and able to pay. And if they're earning normal profit, that means they're breaking even. And this would be a total coincidence that this firm would do that. But if that's the case, then their ATC comes down and then keeps going down, just touches like a tangent line, like demand is a tangent line to that function. And we don't have a profit rectangle because they're breaking even. Now, the last graph that we're going to draw here is going to show them earning a loss. And this is just going to have the ATC be a little bit higher. Again, we have demand that tells us the price that we're going to charge our customers, marginal revenue, how much we receive from each unit, marginal cost, which is our supply curve. And again, we know that the optimal would be supply and demand, but that's not where we're going to be. We're going to be where QF is, where MR equals MC. And again, we're pricing on the demand curve. So PF. Now, if we're in loss, that means price is less than ATC at the quantity that we're producing at. So I'm just going to put my ATC farther up. And when I connect QF, that price up to the ATC value is above the price. And so I would say now they're earning a loss equal to this area. Now, the second part of kind of this lecture is something where we're going to kind of talk about efficiency in a little bit more depth here. We would say that these monopolies are not allocative efficient. They're not socially optimal. These are all kind of ways of saying the same thing. They generate deadweight loss. They have less surplus than a competitive market, right? Which would be where supply equals demand. I think actually I wrote it right here. Price equals marginal cost. That's like demand equals supply, right? And so we aren't going to be here where price equals marginal cost, where price, which comes from the demand curve, equals marginal cost, where supply equals demand. We're not here. So let's identify on our graphs what that Q opt would be. And it's useful for just a moment to identify that that is also corresponding to an optimal price. So this monopoly is charging higher than it should if it were a competitive market. If it were competitive, we'd be where supply equals demand, but we're not. And we're producing way fewer units than Q opt. So we definitely have deadweight loss. Now, one tip that I'm going to use here is I'm going to switch to a highlighter to highlight the deadweight loss. It does go along the demand curve down to that optimal point, and then it kind of hugs the top of that supply curve. So it's a little bit of a curved function there. And then, of course, the back of that corresponds to the QF that we've determined. And it's going to be in the same spot on each one of these. So I'm going to kind of quickly shade those along the QF, and then this just a shade here, down all the way down to that optimal point, which I'll label in just a second. But we've got deadweight loss here that we need to take care of and label on these. And again, goes down that supply curve, down that demand curve, and that's our deadweight loss, right? So it's in kind of the same spot on each one of these graphs. It's in this kind of bounded area between supply and demand. But last thing here, let's kind of quickly say, here's Q opt, right? And that corresponds to P opt. And then we'll do the last one here just so we've got one, Q opt and P opt. And so this obviously is a market failure, right? We have deadweight loss. We would also say that this is not, so number one, it's not allocative efficient, but in addition, it's not productive efficiency. And productive efficiency means minimum ATC, that you're producing at the bottom of the ATC. And it's actually impossible for us to do that in a natural monopoly because we never do get to that bottom of the ATC. So we never would be that. We have what's called excess capacity. Now, very quickly, what we want to do is go back to lecture 1, and we're going to label deadweight loss and the Q opt point on those. So I have my notes from the last time that we talked about lecture 1, and these are the graphs that we drew once already. And so we have here profit. We would identify Q opt where supply equals demand or where the price equals the marginal cost. And so that's going to occur here. And I should extend it all the way down, but it's going to get too messy if I do that. That's Q opt. And of course, that would correspond kind of to a price that's like right over here. That would be P opt. So again, if this market were competitive where supply and demand intercepted, we would have a lower price than what the firm is charging, and we'd have a larger quantity. As a result of that, we are going to have deadweight loss. This one's going to look a little bit more like what we'd expect. It goes from QF up that supply curve and then down that demand curve. And so it really does look like that little triangle that we've kind of come used to. Here you can see it a little bit easier, and I will come back and I'll label that Q opt in just a second. But again, that's our deadweight loss there. And then here, our deadweight loss as well. It's bounded by the supply and demand curve, and it's going all the way down to that QF. So one last thing to add on here is our opt levels. And again, I should probably do this down here on the axis, but again, it's gotten a little bit messy with that MR and everything in there. But you can usually pretty well see it, right? Q opt, it's where supply and demand, or where we would say marginal cost equals price. And so if the marginal cost equals the price, you know that you're at allocative efficient, but it doesn't, right? The demand curve and the marginal cost curve don't intercept there. That's not where we're producing. So we would say the monopoly is inefficient. And these monopolies also, last thing I'll say before I totally forgot, is these monopolies are also not productive efficient, right? Notice that the minimum of the ATC is right here. That's not where we're producing. The minimum of the ATC is here. That's not where we're producing. And in the last one, the minimum of the ATC is here. We are not producing there. So we're not productive efficient either. So market failures abound when we talk about monopolies. Hopefully this helped you understanding natural monopoly and also markets and efficiency. I'll see you next time.